So Star Wars Battlefront has been receiving a lot of love recently, and there is a real growing hype about the potential for a Star Wars Battlefront 3. Now this is something that fans have been dying for, both with the current iteration of Battlefront games and even way back in the older series during the PlayStation 2 days. Now I think it's fair to say that the recent Battlefront 2 from 2017 had an iconically bad start to life. It had 40 hours worth of game time to just unlock like Darth Vader, there was the dreadful loot box fiasco which actually killed it off the bat, and then you literally had it have the most downvoted Reddit post of all time associated to it, so it really wasn't the best launch of a game. However, despite this, over time with a lot of TLC from the devs at EA, Battlefront 2 actually became an incredibly solid game. We saw the addition of new game modes, new maps, and fan favourite heroes and villains, and they were all added completely free of charge. It genuinely got to a stage where the game was essentially what fans had been wanting from day one. However, unfortunately this would not remain the case, as in 2020 Battlefront 2 was completely dropped by DICE and EA, who began solely focusing on making what at the time was Battlefield 6, but as we know, it became Battlefield 2042. You know, the game that clearly worked out amazingly well. Now this did unfortunately lead to the cancellation of upcoming DLCs for Battlefront 2, and this included fan favourites Ahsoka Tano and Asajj Ventress, and unfortunately meant that once again the Battlefront franchise was being left just after 2 games. However, despite this game essentially being left to rot, Battlefront 2 always maintained a cult-like status, and with the recent growth and hype and new articles covering the topic, could fans legitimately see a Battlefront 3 just spoken into existence? Well, in order to answer that, I think we first need to understand what has sparked the recent revival within Battlefront 2. As we can see, it's currently hitting record player numbers since its release, and I think that there are genuinely some quite key factors that are causing this to become an ever-growing hype train, and starting out with the obvious one, the Battlefront 2 community. Now I'm certainly not an expert on the Battlefront 2 community, I did used to briefly stream it over on Twitch, however one thing that I do remember about it is the fact that this is cult-like in terms of support, and once the community gets an idea or a joint direction or something that they want to achieve, they just run with it massively. Now Star Wars fans wanting a Battlefront 3 genuinely seems like a tale as old as time, but this one seems different. It seems like there is actual genuine possibilities that this could happen, like there's some real sort of legs with it. I've seen countless YouTube videos, TikToks, memes, all sorts, all relating to a Battlefront 3 that genuinely, I thought it was legitimate with some of the things I've seen. Like I actually thought EA had just like announced Battlefront 3 at that point. However, what makes this sort of rally cry feel so different to the previous ones is the fact that it's not just actual fans of Battlefront 2 that are calling for a third installment of the franchise. We've seen previous developers get involved and express an interest in creating a new Battlefront 3, as well as an actual actor from the series Andor, who publicly showed his support for a franchise revival via social media. Now with all these taken into account, it's fair to say that the community efforts are certainly not going unnoticed this time. That's why I feel like this is a bit of a different movement than what we've had previously. Another large factor which I think many are overlooking is actually the success of another game which, despite not being Star Wars, it is certainly getting value up to Star Wars assets right now. That being the latest season of Fortnite. So the current version of Fortnite Chapter 6 Season 3, also known as the Galactic Battle, is entirely dedicated to Star Wars, with a multitude of skins, battle passes and emotes, so Epic obviously get that money, but they've also got the actual Battle Royale game mode itself fully Star Warsified. We're talking Star Wars weapons, vehicles, AI Star Wars characters, some of which are definitely being misused.
And what exactly is a big batty blunderlanger?
And even the map itself is at least referencing the Star Wars universe with the different location names. My point being with this is that whether you like it or not, Fortnite is without doubt still one of the biggest games on the planet, and when it is still this incredibly successful with, you know, everything being Star Wars, it at the very least shows the bigwigs at EA that there is still a market for Star Wars games out there. Not that that should be in any doubt anyway, as Star Wars is one of the biggest entities in the world, but I also don't think it's a stretch to say that people will pick up and play Fortnite depending on the theme. And I'm speaking from first-hand experience as an actual Star Wars fan. If there is a Star Wars theme in Fortnite, like there is currently, I'm way more likely to pick it up and play it. So once again, there's a definite influx in the hype and at least the noise surrounding Star Wars games because of this current collab that Epic Games have. I genuinely don't think it's a stretch to say that if you're playing this Star Wars season of Fortnite, it might remind you or inspire you to hop back into Battlefront 2, or at the very least get closer to Star Wars gaming, right? Moving away from the actual video gaming world for a second, I think another core factor which has been massive in the growth of this hype surrounding Battlefront 3 is actually the success of Andor. Now, Andor is without doubt the best Star Wars media we have received since the Disney takeover. Now, personally I don't like the sequel trilogy. I feel that most of what Disney have produced for the Star Wars universe ranges from very underwhelming to honestly damn right awful.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
And if you do like these things, that is fine. However, Andor is an absolute masterpiece, and that seems to be where the general consensus is across all Star Wars fans, not prequel lovers, sequel lovers, OG lovers, whatever. Everybody thinks Andor is pretty good. Now, funnily enough, when good Star Wars content is being produced, most gamers, like myself, are more interested in actually enjoying that content within a different format. Now, Star Wars Battlefront 2 is currently the largest actual Star Wars game which we have, at least in which Star Wars can be experienced in a multiplayer setting. Now, I know we have Fortnite as we discussed earlier, but I'm talking as an actual Star Wars game here. So this growth which has recently been seen within the Battlefront 2 community, or at the very least the growth of Star Wars interest, is definitely somewhat attributed to the mainline Star Wars media actually being at a high standard for a change. And I think building on from this, it's also worth remembering that Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith has just recently had its 20th anniversary and was re-released globally in cinemas. Now, for people like myself who grew up with the prequel trilogy, this is probably a childhood favourite movie, and it definitely got a lot of fans nostalgic about Star Wars once again. I actually think commercially it also did really well. I think it made like 40 odd million, which for a 20-year-old re-release of a movie, which despite being my personal favourite Star Wars movie, it certainly isn't the most critically acclaimed, that is fantastic. I think there's definitely an argument to be made that the high ground has helped lead to high playing numbers recently. However, despite all of this incredible hype that is surrounding Battlefront 3 at the minute, I do think we also need to get our realistic thinking caps on here and actually sort of discuss the negatives attached to Battlefront 3. Now, it's really worth noting that when it came to the Battlefront 2 revival, that team that built that game are split across multiple other projects now. That passion which fully went into reviving Battlefront 2 isn't going to be easy to cultivate, as the team that did all that isn't in full effect, so you're not going to get that same experience if that team was to go and build Battlefront 3, because they don't exist at the moment. I think we also need to remember that when we first did get Battlefront 2, it was an absolute shit show. It did essentially single-handedly put an end to loot boxes being as prevalent as what they are within video games, due to the greed just being unprecedented by companies at that time. Now, I'm not saying that we'd have that issue reoccur if we did get a Battlefront 3, but the point remains that with a different set of developers, there's no way of being certain that a Battlefront 3 would actually receive the love that it deserves. And if you think this is all hypotheticals and you want an actual example of where a Star Wars game has not been treated as it should have been, well, look no further than the recent OG Star Wars Battlefront 2 remaster we received. In 2024, Aspyr released the Battlefront Classic Collection, which was entailed to be a full remastering of the classic Battlefront 1 and Battlefront 2, with enhanced graphics and multiplayer capabilities. However, we got absolutely none of that. Instead, we were met with a horrendous attempt at remastering what is an absolute classic in the gaming industry. There was an absolutely absurd amount of bugs and glitches, and most players weren't even able to enter a multiplayer match as the servers were just that shit. The sheer lack of care which went into remastering an icon of the gaming landscape really concerns me that if it's not handled correctly, future Battlefront titles could be treated in a very similar fashion. Anyway, with all of that taken into account, what is the answer then? Could we actually get a Battlefront 3? Now, I think the honest answer, purely based on everything what we've seen so far, is no. Now, before you boo me and dislike the video and all that horrible stuff, the main reason I say this is because I do believe we will get another Battlefront title. However, I think the more likely direction is that we will see a remaster of this second phase of Battlefront 1 or Battlefront 2 for the current gen titles. Now, this is obviously similar to what we've seen with the classic versions with Aspire, and they were terrible. I would like to think the developers have learned from that mistake, and when it comes to remasters, generally speaking, they're a hell of a lot cheaper to make than new titles. So I think if we're going to see any new Battlefront game anytime soon, I feel like that's the most likely direction. However, ultimately though, if you want a Battlefront 3, the best thing you can do as a fan, honestly, is just shout about it. Keep getting involved with big Battlefront creators, and just keep playing the game. That's the best thing that's going to make EA notice, like, oh, there is still an actual audience here for this. That's the main way that DICE, or whoever the hell actually wants to take the Battlefront mantle, is going to acknowledge this and just demonstrate that there is still a core interest in the actual game itself. Because if there's interest, which we've clearly seen in recent weeks, there's money to be made out of this, and developers are going to love that. But more importantly, what do you guys think? Do you think we'll actually get a Battlefront 3? Let me know down in the comments below, and if you are new here and you have enjoyed, please do consider subscribing, as it really helps out the channel, and we're really close to 1,000 now. Anyway, that's ever so much for watching. I hope to see you in another video sometime soon.